specifically, but it's an example of how UNICEF really works for women and families as a whole. The pictures are a little blurry because I didn't have better ones, but this is an example of a lady health worker program that UNICEF has in Pakistan. And so when there was a flood in one of the areas of Pakistan a few years ago, UNICEF realized that there was this increased need to vaccinate women and girls and children, and specifically girls for something like tetanus, because if we vaccinate an adolescent girl, she and all of her future offspring are protected from tetanus, and so it's really important to vaccinate adolescent girls against that. But we realized that with male health workers, which were much more common in Pakistan, that just wasn't something that was culturally appropriate for them to go door to door and meet with these women and these adolescent girls and female children and talk to them about health issues and vaccinate them. And so UNICEF decided to hire and train, I think, something like 13,000 lady health workers in the year 2010. And they were so effective in doing the health work for UNICEF. Something to note about UNICEF is that 80% of their field staff are people hired and trained from the local community, so that there's no language barrier, there's no cultural barrier, and they're much more effective in their work. And so this was an example of focusing primarily on females, and so these women were getting paid, were able to do incredible work. I think in just that year, they were able to vaccinate 440,000 adolescent girls for tetanus to protect them and their offspring. And so it was a really incredible program that I think is still going, and just an example of the work that UNICEF does for women too. Before I close, I just wanted to inspire you all to take a little bit of action. I mentioned Trick or Treat for UNICEF, but there's so many other campaigns that we have going on year-round, and we have the need for people to feel inspired to fundraise, to advocate, to really think globally and act locally in their own communities. Constantly, we are updating our advocacy website with new sign-on letters, with new legislation that we're really pushing for, with new ways that you can take action. This is the example of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This letter was drafted specifically for President Obama, but now we will have an updated one when it's time to really activate again for the CRC. But in the Bay Area, we also have a congressional action team that I spearhead, and these pictures are from Chicago and from Florida, because we have 14 other congressional action teams around the country. But here in the Bay Area, we've had some great meetings with Leader Pelosi's office, with Senator Barbara Boxer's office before she retired, and with Barbara Lee's office in Berkeley and Oakland. And we're just looking to have more people join our team from all walks of life, with all experiences, so that we can really have this great grassroots movement and make our government really realize the importance of supporting UNICEF. The government donates $132.5 million to UNICEF every year, which is really important because that's, I think, one of the top 3 largest amounts that UNICEF receives from any country. And we can't lose that. That's something that we have to lobby for every single year, and that makes up a good portion of UNICEF's overall budget, because UNICEF doesn't receive funding from the United Nations. And so we don't want to see that in jeopardy with the new administration at all. And so we really want to emphasize that UNICEF's work for children, for girls, for women, for families across the globe is in jeopardy if we don't get that funding. And UNICEF's really apolitical work for children shouldn't be affected by partisan politics at all. One last thing. Every single year we have an annual meeting, and it includes an advocacy day of action. It includes a celebration with all of our donors and volunteers and supporters across the nation to come together and celebrate the accomplishments of the past year, and 2 days of an incredible student summit for high school and college students. whether or not you're part of a UNICEF club. And it's a great way for supporters to come together and share their ideas and be inspired for future careers in philanthropy and international development, and to really just gain a lot of leadership skills. And so this is an opportunity that we have coming up in DC very soon. And I just wanted to say thank you again for having me. Even though it was a bit of a drive coming down from San Francisco, I can really feel the positive energy in this room, and how many people here care about the work that the United Nations is doing, that UNICEF is doing, and that you really want to see a better world for the children and the future. So thank you very much for having me, and I will take questions at this time. Yes.
Thanks for your talk. It was wonderful. You're very certainly personable and articulate.
Thank you.
You're showing off for your mom, so that's great.
You can tell she's very proud.
She should be. I have a question. For a lot of us that care about the world,
Yes.
we are inundated with requests for money from all kinds of organizations, local, national, international, UN-related, not UN-related. Could you explain to us, if someone were to give $100 or $1,000 to the U.S. Fund for UNICEF, how that money is broken down and how much of it gets to the field?
Definitely. I would say that, first of all, and for any organization or cause that you're interested in donating to, definitely check third-party organizations that verify the legitimacy of any 501c3 organization, and those websites include Better Business Bureau, Charity Navigator, and I think there's a couple more really great ones. And for UNICEF, for the U.S. Fund for UNICEF, 90.2 cents of every dollar that you donate goes directly to programs for children, and I think there's a little bit of variation depending on what country office the money gets diverted to, but having a 9.8 cent on the dollar overhead administration cost is really low, and so we're very, very effective at what we do.
That includes both the U.S. Fund for UNICEF and
Yes.
UNICEF itself?
Yes.
Within that 9.8?
Yes.
That's great.
I think I saw another hand somewhere. Yes.
I can't remember what the acronym stands for.
Oh. Yes. United Nations, it used to be United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund when it originally started back in 1946, but we dropped international because it's a little redundant when you're already associated with the United Nations. And we dropped emergency because UNICEF doesn't exclusively work in emergencies anymore. We work in the development context in many countries. And so now we're just United Nations Children's Fund, but we've decided to keep the acronym UNICEF. Yeah. Yes.
What parts of the world do your programs focus most on, and what parts do you guys focus less on?
So I will say that
Could you repeat?
so the question was, what parts of the world do you focus more on with the programs and which parts less? UNICEF mostly works in developing countries for in terms of programming. We have about 35 national committees, which are the more developed nations that support UNICEF, just like the US Fund does. But I think in over 156 was the last number I heard, but I think it's more now. We actually have programs for children in 156 countries and territories. And that number is fluctuating a little bit because as the refugee crisis gets a little bit more serious each year, some of our national committee offices in European countries have converted to having programs also for those refugees that have escaped and those children that are in need there. And so I'm not sure about the exact numbers, but mostly we work in developing countries and in places that are really vulnerable to natural disasters, to disease outbreaks, and those that have a lot of conflict going on. And the reason for that is that UNICEF doesn't just go into a country and start setting up programs. We have to be invited by a country's government. And so we work with the government at every level, and the first step has to be taken by a country's national government.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So most of the employees are working in the native region where they're from, right?
Yes.
So how many, I guess, like Americans do you have kind of abroad in developing countries working for the program?
Yeah, a lot of the, I don't know the exact number of how many Americans are working abroad, but I will say that most of the community-oriented work is done by people working in their native areas. Some of the higher positions, like developing a health program in a country, or doing some country-based advocacy with a country's national government for some policies. A lot of those things are done by staff from America. Yeah. Yes.
In a lot of countries, there's huge refugee camps that don't seem to go away and go on and on and on. Does UNICEF have the opportunity to work within those refugee camps?
Definitely, yeah. I know there are several camps. I can't even think of the names. There's the Zaatari refugee camp for Syrian families in Jordan. There's the Dadaab refugee camp in I want to say Kenya. And these have been around for years, and they're ever growing. And there's generations of families, especially in Kenya, of refugees that have been there. And so definitely UNICEF does a lot of the work in setting up sustainable water supplies for those camps. Providing emergency education for children is really a really big priority for UNICEF that only now is being recognized as sort of a global priority because, as I said, some refugee camps have generations that have been born and raised in camps, and so we really want to make sure that those children are also getting educated, so UNICEF works hard on that. The way UNICEF operates in emergency context is a cluster system, and so in order to be the most effective, UNICEF works with several different partners on one program area, and they'll usually appoint a head organization to really take the lead on something. So UNICEF, I think, co-leads nutrition, so malnutrition management and making sure that kids have access to proper food. In emergencies, they lead the cluster for water and sanitation. They lead the cluster for education and some of the other priorities. So UNICEF works heavily in refugee camps. Yes?
I wonder, under the Trump administration, if you know how much money the Trump administration would like to have cut, when it would become effective, and what is the system to determine yes or no on it? Does Congress decide?
Yeah, so the reason that we're focusing so much on advocacy right now is that Congress will decide the budget, I believe, at the end of April. And I'm not sure how the potential budget cuts to the UN might affect